And of course, it means if I'm talking oil and water, I'm also talking with our good friend Kevin Lindsey. You guys know him from TA Petro and TA Travel Centers. He's the man with the plan who makes sure that you understand that maintenance matters. And as always, every once in a while, he brings along two friends, and we know them, Eric Arnold and Byron Kelchner. Hey, Kevin, good morning. How are you?
I'm fine. How you doing, Jimmy?
Much relieved that these two beautiful birds were not poisoned.
I bet.
Oh my
That's
God.
right. Yeah.
I was heartbroken. I was heartbroken because Dre and I could smell it. And like I said, the bird expert said, he goes, there's a chance the moment they put their mouths in it, they went, something's wrong with this water. They can't smell, he said, but they can feel, and their tongues can feel. And so you're probably okay on this issue. So I was just very relieved yesterday, especially because I got my AC fixed. I know a little bit about that, by the way. If you ever want to talk about ACs, when we have an AC talk on maintenance matters, that's my bag, that's my jam. But we're continuing
Oh, okay.
we're continuing our conversation with Eric and Byron. It's good to have you both. Hey guys, welcome aboard. Good to have you, by the way.
Yeah, thanks. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Kevin, I'm going to kind of let you take point on this because, we've been going through this material, and the other joke I was going to make on you was simply by opening up the segment and going, when is an oil approved by use by an OEM? And just ask you the question directly, but I'm not going to do that. Where would you like to begin today?
I'll be honest with you. I can't remember where we kind of left off last time.
No, and I was thinking about
And
this. I was thinking about this, Kevin, because there's so much information here and so much to kind of dig into that it kind of felt like, we were all over the place because, after all, that's my question style, all over the place and into left field in the hopes that we can somehow find our way back. But I was thinking about maybe talking about the idea of, we'll start by asking Eric and Byron this question. I want to talk about the difference between best practices and recommendations and requirements, because they're not the same thing. Eric, are you following me here? And then maybe we can work our way backwards. Talk about that, because often you get recommendations, very strong recommendations, but it doesn't mean if you don't do that, you're dead in the water or on the side of the road. Fair place to start, Eric?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're correct. They are they sound the same, right? But they are very distinct. And best practices are obviously what they sound like. Best practices. This is what's going to get you through the day, or get your engine maintained and keep it reliable and running. That's a really simple explanation. Whereas the requirements, I always think about like a warranty. Let's say that your engine is still within the warranty period. There are a couple of things that will drive requirements. Warranty is a big one. Obviously, things like emissions, stuff like that. Those are requirements. They fall within regulations or what have you. But I think of requirements, in the case of maintenance. Let's look at the warranty, for example. Use an engine oil that fits your application, one that falls within the guidelines of that manufacturer. That's spelled out in the manual. It's usually pretty straightforward, and it will have some certain criteria that it will need to pass or follow. Use something like that. Change the oil within whatever their requirement guideline is. Once the engine is out of that warranty, then your best practices is usually to follow that kind of guidance, right? You want to make sure that you keep it within where it's going to operate before it self-destructs. But the best practice would be, schedule it so that you can, work around it. Make sure that it works within your schedule so that you're not inefficiently having to go and stop and do something. Hopefully that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And by the way, I mean, the definition of what you just said, there's another single simple word, and that's maintenance as opposed to repair. I mean, that's exactly it, and that kind of gets down to it. And Kevin, I wanted to pivot to you before going to Byron here. When you talk to a customer, when you talk to the folks that you work with on a regular basis, are you able? And I'm asking for process here. Are you able to say, look, you will survive on this? I always tell the story about, when I had a very old car, I had an old cop car that I just enjoyed driving, but it was like basically it was all kind of put together with duct tape. And what the guy told me, he says, "Look, I can top off your AC for $400, or I can give you a new compressor for $4,000." He says, "What do I recommend?" He says, "Or what will get you to the next checkpoint?" He said, "Go with the next checkpoint here. You got other things to spend your money on. This thing is a 30-year-old car." How do you talk to the folks? This is a different situation, though, because people make their livings and their livelihoods. How do you tell people you can get by on this, but if you really want to make this work, here's what you have to do? How do you distinguish that for a client and customer?
Well, to be honest, Jimmy, that's a fairly regular conversation, a lot of times with customers, because, no one wants to spend that money, right? For sure. But to be honest, you kind of have to lay it out, I mean, really and truly, especially when it comes to the engine and the maintenance that's been done on it. There's so many different factors that fall into that, what oils have they been using? How long have they been using this oil? Have they changed it on this regular basis? So there's a lot of stuff in the background information that you really need to know before you can give a true and honest answer to that. And that's one thing a lot of people that do know me know I'm going to ask those questions. I've been around so long that, too many times I said, well, you should be able to get by with this. Well, I never even asked, well, what are you doing with this piece of equipment? How are you operating it? How often have you maintained it in the past? There's so many of those things that you really need to know. But to be honest, I always try to make a recommendation, based on the customer and what they're really looking for. So you kind of have to know your audience, I guess you could say, as you're saying. Given those recommendations.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing too, because there's what you can and what you should, but there's also a matter of who are you talking to as well, and not even just the equipment, but sometimes we know people. It's like, look, I have a budget. I'm trying to work around that budget. I just need to be able to get to this point until I make this job work. And once I do, I can then do the important stuff. But right now I got to do the minimum stuff. It's such a kind of it's almost a psychological read. I mean, you almost become kind of like their truck psychiatrist, where you're kind of helping them kind of navigate their emotional well-being for what they can get away with until they can get to a place where they can do everything they need, right?
Well, I have been called the truck whisperer in the
past. And I want to pivot to Byron here. Byron, of course, if you guys don't know, of course, we all know who Kevin Lindsey is. Just to remind you, Eric, of course, is a field engineer, and Byron Kelchner, of course, is the senior national account manager fleets over Castrol. I wanted Byron to kind of talk to you about this because you're an account manager, which is very, very different than just simply a salesman. That's something very different because your job is the maintenance of the account, to kind of get back to maintenance. How do you have the ongoing conversation with the clients and with the people that you work with to make sure that the product is doing what it needs to do, but at the same time making them aware of what's next and maybe what the next step they have to take is?
Yeah, no, I think that's a good question, and I really think it's a little bit of things that both Eric said and Kevin said as well. I think a lot of it is asking questions. So it's kind of with the fleet, what are the goals of the fleet? So I think a salesman, if you want to look at that, sometimes comes in and wants to sell a product, and that's what they're there for, and they're not always looking for what is the customer's ultimate goal. With that, is that extending drain intervals? Is that maybe a certain type of maintenance issue that they've had within their fleet that's been recurring that seems, to kind of continually happen? So really it starts with a lot of questions. What are their goals? What are their concerns? And really look at kind of formulating a plan after that, an action plan. So let's say if somebody, continually has maybe like a DPF, that particulate filter wants to kind of regen, or they having some oil burn off, with a previous supplier's products. We want to look at those things and talk to them and work about it. And you kind of want to start out with an action plan. And I think you always have to alter what that looks like. But that's really about staying in touch with your customer and really trying to get a little bit of a pulse on their business and kind of what's going on and what's with the, going on with their maintenance program. And you have to reach out to folks like Eric and work with people like him. That's what we do on our side quite heavily is, get that real specialist kind of engineering type of viewpoint to look at the information and make sure we're giving the best point of guidance for customers.
Eric, we've been talking all morning long. Thank you, by the way, Byron, for that. That actually makes a lot of sense and actually gives you kind of a complete picture. But we've been talking about licensing and certification in the training sector in the last half hour in the wake of that the terrible events in Florida. So much about licensing and certification systems are, in fact, in your field, a voluntary program. Can you talk about API? I realize that we kind of jump in what I call in media res, where I kind of just throw people in the middle of the Shasta, as it were, and just kind of say, let's swim our way out. But I do want to kind of go back and establish some baseline stuff. Can you, and we can pivot to Kevin after that, talk about API's engine oil licensing and certification system and what that means when people see that that something has been certified or licensed, what it means to the consumer, what it means to the customer, what it means to the client?
Yeah, the API certification is sort of the benchmark or the standard, and as you mentioned, it is voluntary, but they're really the holders or coordinators of what is the quote unquote standard. What does everybody want to try to achieve? And when the API puts out these standards or their licensing criteria, they don't just go out and do this on their own. They work with all of the oil manufacturers, the engine manufacturers. They come together and everybody sort of coordinates efforts and comes up with what would really be a good fit sort of all around to achieve the goal. The current ones, there are actually two primary goals. They're focused around emissions and around fuel efficiency. Those are sort of the next goals in the evolution of engine oils. And as we said, it is a voluntary licensing program. However, almost everybody goes ahead and proceeds with that because a lot of the engine manufacturers will sort of go above and beyond what the API licensing requirements are, and they'll throw something else out there that perhaps a requirement of the oil that will work better with their engines or that they foresee as being necessary. So to kind of wrap that up, there are a lot of different but very similar types of tests, and not everybody, as far as engine or oil marketers, has every certification or approval, but they're all out there, and they're sort of the big, more popular ones, if that makes sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. It also allows people to make informed decisions because where you are certified and where you are licensed, people are able to see that and make their choices. Accordingly, knowing they were given the information they needed to make those choices. They can't just assume that the API stamp of approval is there. They've got to actually dig a little bit deeper sometimes, or at least the OEM kind of has to point that out as well. By the way, I brought that up, Kevin, because the last time we talked about all this stuff, we actually got into a big conversation about the donut, if you remember correctly. And I kind of wanted to let people know where the donut actually was coming from because we kind of got loosey-goosey about that discussion. I do want to ask, by the way, and to kind of, I'll go back. Kevin, you can start, but then, of course, we can go to Eric and Byron here to talk about where does Castrol fit in on all of this. Where are they in regards to a lot of the stuff we've been talking about over the last couple of weeks? Because I realize that I'm calling upon y'all's expertise and not giving you a chance to talk about Castrol. So anybody want to start? Take the crack at the title.
Well, I can
go ahead,
throw
Eric.
something out there, Kevin. Yeah, if you're talking about the API donut, again, if you are out and you walk into at the TA, you walk into the maintenance shop and you look on the shelf because you need to grab a gallon of oil. Look on the bottle, and that donut, it's called that because it's shaped just like a donut, and it will spell out some of the very basic information about what that oil contains. And that donut, it's the API donut, so it will give the API certification and some basic information next to the donut. We'll also include things like OEM or engine manufacturer approvals as well.
Kevin, can we kind
Yeah.
of then pivot to you? Go ahead, my friend.
No, I was going to say, yeah, that's one of those things. A lot of people, you see this. Most of us has been, not just in this industry, but even done work on our own cars and stuff in the past at home and stuff. You bought oil for anything. You've always picked it up, looked at it. That donut's been there, right? Because typically what everyone does looking at oil is they pick the oil up and they look at the center of that donut because that's the viscosity, right? So that tells you what viscosity is. Everybody always, that, I don't know if that's been entrenched into our culture or what, but it's like everyone thinks that's the main part of that. And quite honestly, it's really not. And Eric, please correct me if I'm wrong here. The top part of that donut that's given that classification, that's really the spec that oil's meeting. The viscosity can depend on usage and what you're doing with it. That's why, a lot of most lawnmowers and things like that require straight 30 weight because they don't want that viscosity level changing too much, with heat and cold and all this other stuff. So, but it's really that classification of it that makes the huge difference,
Let me ask Eric and you a question, by the way. And this is about how things are laid out. Do you think the assumption is by putting the number in the middle, that's the place to start, but it doesn't mean that's the most important part? That's simply kind of like the baseline. Look there first and then make your way around the circle. Do you think that is somehow transformed into, I got my number, I'm done? I mean, am I sounding like an idiot there, or is that, do you think, what's happening here? I mean, is it like, I got my number, I'm fine?
Well, I'll put this out there that viscosity it can be very confusing, and kind of like Kevin said, well, I got my 30 weight or I got my whatever, and I can get going. Nowadays, especially with like transmissions, you've got a lot of overlapping viscosity grades. So you don't necessarily want to just go by the grade. And the other wrench is you may have two current diesel engine oils that are 10W30, and they may not be the same. One may be the fuel efficiency, the FA version, or the other one may be the CK version. Both are diesel engine oil 10W30s, but they're very different. So, yeah, paying attention to that API donut, the other information can be critical.
Let me kind of also pivot to our friend Byron and ask him, when you're talking with the fleets whose accounts you manage, do you go through this with them? Like I said, I realize I sound like I'm talking, trucking 101 for dummies, but I'm just curious because, like I said, shorthand often becomes sloppy. You know what I'm saying? That there are not corners you can cut, but there are things where you start working in the shorthand, and that can be really great. It can make for great efficiency. But every once in a while, you got to slow down and really take a look at what it is you're doing. And I was kind of curious if in working with clients, you find that they are, helping them maintain the balance between working at the most productive and efficient fashion, while at the same time maybe taking a harder look at what it is they're doing and why it is they're doing it.
Yeah. Let me answer that in two parts, so to speak. So I think, a lot of the fleets, we work with and talk to, those fleets they've been running these maintenance programs for a long period of time. And, we know that this, the freight industry and trucking is, it's going through some really difficult times. Margins are extremely tight. And I feel like from working with these customers, their maintenance departments, they really are keyed in on what they need to do. And they've worked those maintenance programs over a long period of time. And they've done it they know what works with them. They know how far they can stretch out, let's just say oil change intervals and maintenance intervals. So they can do that in a safe manner. So they're not, incurring a lot of expense, for unplanned downtime or unplanned repairs. And they really do that because times are just tough, and they've continually been tough. There's always been these peaks and valleys, and it seems like, unfortunately, we've been a little bit of an extended valley for a period of time here, with some freight recession. So I think a lot of fleets, they really have a handle on what's going on and then they know what to do. Now, the other side of that is in working heavily with TA, when you look at a lot of drivers that come in, and we kind of say there's like new school and old school drivers, and that really has nothing to do kind of with age per se. When we have a lot of what we're classifying as new school drivers they might just be really new to the industry. So maybe they've had a career change over the past couple of years and decided to get into trucking and become a driver, or they were just kind of new into the business overall. And those are folks that maybe haven't grown up in the business, they haven't grown up in the industry, and they're just not as informed. So you could have an old school driver, which hey, some of that could be the age. They've been out there for a couple decades, or maybe they're somebody that's in the early 20s, but they've grown up in trucking and they're familiar with what needs to happen and what needs to go on, and they're more informed, right? They can look at that donut. They know exactly what it is. They know what their equipment takes. But there's a big group of people out there now that we would consider that are newer into the industry, that come into folks and see, people like Kevin at TravelCenters of America, and they're just unsure because it's not in their wheelhouse. It never has been in their wheelhouse. So that's where it's really important to try and give some education and learning to those types of customers, and that we see kind of out there.
And that's a great way to kind of pivot back to Kevin here for a second is too, because one of the other things about being not just a truck whisperer, but a trucker whisperer is that you've also got to read the human being, because there are people out there, Kevin, who the moment you start telling them anything about how to roll their rig, how to run anything, they get so defensive, you would think they were building up the embankments for Pickett's charge.
This is my truck. Right?
I mean, this is my truck. What are you? I'm not. What are you talking about? So how do you kind of onboard somebody when it comes to a lot of the new stuff? I mean, and that's one of the questions I would have for all of you before we wrap this up. Each time you have a new product, each time you have a new breakthrough, what do you do? What do you do to make sure that the customer, client, person you're working with, partner in the space understands this is what's happened? How do you onboard them to this new material other than saying listening to Maintenance Matters on Road Gang Radio?
Yeah, that's what I tell them. So, that's all I say. No. I mean, there is, Jimmy, you're right. The first thing is, number one, understanding your customer's needs. How is this thing going to be operating and everything? Understanding the new product, or new formulation, whatever we're talking about, right? Understanding that to a point and trying to find that good balance where those two can meet and use that as a reference point of explaining, to that customer, hey, this is why, right? It sounds like you do this, so this is probably what you need, but you've got to do a lot of that research in the background before you even open your mouth and have that conversation, right? I think that's a critical part of it, to be honest. So.
By the way, that brings us back to Byron for a second, because often this job falls upon you, does it not? I mean, that's part of what the accounts management is like, okay, so here we go. We got something new for you. Let's take a look at what this does and what this means for you, right?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. It does. And it's, some of what Kevin has said is really starting to kind of understand why is the change happening? Because that's usually, the customer or working with fleets, that's usually the first question is, why is there something new? Why is there this whole new PC12 oil category that's coming up? Why is it? And really kind of understanding the why. And I think what we need to make sure is not everybody's an oil expert. Not everybody's an Eric Arnold that can, know the ins and outs of everything and describe that. So it's about being able to take that information, understanding the why, and putting that really kind of in, I don't want to say dumb it down, because that's not really the right way to say it either, but really kind of making it digestible so that somebody can understand on their level of their level of comprehension of what it is and why it matters to them or why it should matter to them. So to me, I think that's a little bit of the challenge on my side with what I do.
I looked over at the time. I'm not kidding, guys. We're done. And I'm like, I was just getting to the meat of what I was going to ask. Promise me, guys, the next time all three of you come back, I want to talk about what is new in the space. I want to talk about what is coming. I want to talk about what people should be looking for. Having kind of set up the baseline for what people should do already, I think it kind of sets us up really nicely if we get a chance to talk again, to talk precisely about what it is, where we're headed, and what it is we can look for. Promise me? I got an okay from you guys on that?
Absolutely.
Sounds good.
Sounds good. Kevin Lindsey, by the way, is the man who usually takes the ride with us solo. We always love having him on board. But also, we want to say welcome and good morning to Byron Kelchner, who is the Senior National Account Manager for Fleets, and Eric Arnold, Field Engineer, that's with Castrol, and, of course, our friend Kevin Lindsey, Manager of Technical Service at TravelCenters of America. Guys, you know all the ins and outs. By the way, you can go to ta-petro.com. Where can we, by the way, Eric, where can we go? I'm sorry, I asked the wrong person. Byron, where can we go for more information on Castrol, by the way?
Yep. Yeah. If you just go online and enter castrolusa.com, you'll bring us right to our website, and you can find all of our heavy-duty line of products just selectable in the tabs right there, and the customer can learn more.
Thank you all so very much. Kevin, we will talk at you next week. Have the best of weeks, guys, and wonderful weekends and great Labor Day, since I won't talk to anybody but Kevin until then. Get out of here.